maybe I don't inherently love cooking and slaving away in the kitchen. And I find I have other things I want to do with my time. And I don't think I can even blame it on like, oh, I'm busy and I have kids. I think I felt like this before I had kids, and I would feel like this once they're out of the house. Cooking is not something that I inherently get a lot of joy from, but it is a part that you still like have to do. You still have to decide what to eat every night for the rest of your life.
Welcome to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens, a show for people who embrace the warm and cozy spirit of everyday living in the Midwest. From the blog Random Sweets, I'm your host, Staci Mergenthal. Today's guest is Amanda Runia, a busy mom, a South Dakota business owner, and a self-proclaimed non-cook who has still managed to gather an abundance of beloved Midwest comfort food recipes from her family. And drawing from the kitchens of her mother-in-law, her grandmother, and her mom, Amanda shares her approach to keeping mealtime manageable and delicious, plus her go-to resources for recipes that bring a little warmth and nostalgia to the table, even though she doesn't inherently love cooking. Now, if you want to see the photos and get the recipes and links to the resources that we're talking about today, like always, they're on my website, randomsweets.com. Amanda shares her recipes for chicken divan, a few versions of goulash, rhubarb juice, Grandma Joe's casserole. There's a baked oatmeal recipe and hamburger rice skillet. There's a beef taco skillet and Amanda's alfredo sauce that has ruined it for all other alfredo sauces when they're dining out. Amanda, welcome to Funeral Potatoes and Wool Mittens.
Awesome. Great to be here, Staci.
This is going to be a fun episode because one of the first things that you said to me when we started talking about you being on the show was, you're like, well, I'm not much of a cook.
Yep.
And then you proceeded to tell me about this cookbook that you like to use called the I Hate to Cook book.
Yep.
Which I have now checked out from the library just to check into that. So you're going to talk a little bit about that too. Just tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Amanda. I am in Brookings, South Dakota. So that's about an hour north of Sioux Falls. I live with my husband, Michael, and my 3 kids. They're 9, 7, and now 6. I've got 2 boys and a girl. So they're all in elementary school now, which is amazing. I own my own business here in Brookings, In-House Ally, where I get to do coaching for business owners. I help them when they need big decisions, like the kind that keep them up at night. So that's when they call me, is when they need a little dose of Amanda to get some clarity for those big decisions that usually involve money or people hiring type decisions. I got into that. Actually, I'm an ex-accountant. So I'm a licensed CPA, but very much non-practicing, haven't done taxes in quite a few years. Turns out good with people, bad with details. So that was a hard pivot early in my career. And on the side, I mean, I do that as well as do all the kid stuff at home and try to be home when they get off the bus at the end of the day and take it a little lighter in the summers when we're doing the family stuff. My husband works at Solventum, which used to be 3M here in Brookings.
Yeah.
So we've been here maybe coming up on 12 years, 11 and a half or so years. And we plan on being lifers here probably. When we got married, we moved out here to be pretty close to his family because they're about 45 minutes away out in the country. And we are about 3.5 hours away from a good chunk of my family in Minnesota.
Okay. Where's his family again?
Outside of Lake Norden.
Okay.
So his dad and his uncle do a lot of farming kind of around like the Esteline, Lake Poncet area.
Sure. Okay.
Yep.
So when you say that you've been in Brookings for 12 years, where did you come from? Where did you guys live before that?
When we met, we were in Rapid City doing college. So he was at School of Mines. I was at Black Hill State, but I did the Rapid City campus. So I only went up to Spearfish 2 times, once for a job fair and once for graduation. I got to live with my grandma out there. I had done a couple summers with her. And then I went to college actually at 16. I skipped my last 2 years of high school. I don't know if I told you that. Ended up in college in Minnesota for a semester, then in Wisconsin for a 1.5 years, and wanted to go move in with my grandma and settle down in Rapid City. So I did night classes there, got involved with the School of Mines community intervarsity group, which is where we met. But there's not a lot of engineering jobs out in tourist town in western South
Yeah.
Dakota. And we wanted to settle closer to family. So shortly
Mhm.
after we graduated, we moved to this east side of South Dakota to be near family.
Yeah. Fun fact, I skipped my last year of high school, so we have that in common.
Nice.
Yeah.
Proud
And
GED owner over here.
right. And then college graduate, so I think we did
Yep.
just fine, right? Some people just take different paths.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Midwesterner, obviously if you went to college out there, give us just a little, paint us a picture of you as a Midwesterner. You grew up in Minnesota?
Yes. So I was born and spent my early childhood in Plymouth, Minnesota. So suburbs of Minneapolis.
Hmm.
I'm number 6 out of 8 kids, so a very
Wow.
large family. My mom stayed home with us. We were in the suburbs up until 8th grade, and then we moved down to very rural southern Minnesota, so Keister, like 2 miles north of Iowa. So we went from town of 70,000, large school district, huge community, down to this totally rural area. That was a little bit of a culture shock, but was there until I went off to college. And then a lot of
Hmm.
my family is in the kind of the Albert Lee area. And I've got a few people kind of spread out a few hours radius from there.
Do you have any favorite Midwest things that you do or places that you've been? How about any memorable vacations? We a lot of times do that quintessential Black Hills, Rapid
Yeah.
City, Mount Rushmore, Bear Country, Reptile Garden. Back when I was younger, the Flintstone Park was still open. Do you have any from when you were younger or your kids? Did you take your kids anywhere really cool?
Yeah. So when I was younger, as you can imagine, 8 kids, there was not a lot of big vacations. But we did do the quintessential. My grandma had moved out to the Black Hills when I was pretty young. And so we did a couple trips out to the Black Hills to go see her. And I had aunt and uncle and 2 cousins, and then later on, a couple more family members out there. And then my mom's side of the family was actually in the suburbs of Chicago. So we did a couple
Oh.
family trips that direction. And it feels like that was kind of it for vacations. Like we're either going to Rapid or we're going to Chicago. And we
Mhm.
did finally take our kids on their first like Rapid City Black Hills vacation a year ago, last summer. And of course, their favorite part was the hotel pool. So that was successful.
That's so funny. You can go anywhere and just stay in a hotel pool. You can
Yep.
do that in Brookings, right?
We the big thing we do with our kids now is every summer. I think we just had our 5th summer up in northern Minnesota with my husband's family. We go to Elephant Lake. It's
Oh,
like way north, way up in the boonies. There's no cell service for like 15 miles. It's this little lake with the family-owned resort. We got a couple cabins, and it's my husband's parents and siblings and all their kids. So there's 20 some of us out there for a whole
okay.
every summer.
That sounds fun. I have not heard of that, so it must be really out in the boonies.
It's way up there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about food. Even though you say, I'm not a cook.
Yep.
Your mom had 8 children. So
Yeah.
one would assume, wow, your mother must have been a great cook, and you probably are really good in the kitchen and had a great influence. Let's talk a little bit about that and
Yeah.
what you are like in the kitchen. Tell me a little bit about this I Hate to Cook book.
Yeah. So this is where I love kind of that feel that you bring in with the podcast of that Midwestern cozy, right? Looking back and now being an adult, I don't think my mom would have said she was the best cook on the planet. But we have just this immense amount of nostalgia and cozy feels from the food that my mom used to cook us. And a lot of it revolved around creating good family meals around the table, a lot of figuring out how to stretch a pound of ground beef over
Yeah,
the
wow.
years. So one that was really prominent to me was goulash. And my mom liked to follow the rules. So she had so many recipe boxes of these cut out little recipe cards from the back of a pasta sauce can or the box of
Mm,
noodles. There was not a lot of cooking on the fly. And sometimes I would say, Mom, I want you to make goulash tonight. And she'd say, well, which one? Like the one that, I have to know exactly which recipe card. I'm like, I don't know, maybe the one with noodles tonight instead of rice, because there was so many variations.
Mhm.
And I thought, just throw it together, Mom. Can't you just like put it in a pan? And she'd start pulling out her box and she'd start laying out recipe card after recipe card on the table of like, and I'm like, the only difference between this one and that one is that instead of, kidney beans, it's these other beans. Like, can't you just mix it? But she had so many different recipes for stovetop, ground beef, stretch meals. And
Mhm.
there was so much nostalgia and cozy in that world. I think being number six, I didn't get as much by her side cooking experience. Um, kids in a large family have some different experiences of where you're
Yeah.
in the age group. But I do remember how it still felt like such a labor of love, like such a way that she cared for us that, I mean, we had a lot of struggles financially, and just seasons of stress in our life growing up. But I never questioned if there was going to be, a comforting meal and
Mm.
food on the table and sit down and have family time. Um, and so that really brings a lot of my Midwestern food memories. And of course, it went through seasons. As we moved and the family got smaller and kids moved out, we entered in the season of crock pot land.
Ooh,
Like,
yeah.
I think twice a week when we moved down to southern Minnesota, we had a hunk of meat with a bunch of potatoes and carrots and onions in the crock pot all day. And nothing special about it, but it was the best.
I still think a hunk of meat and potatoes and carrots in a crock pot all day are really good.
Yeah. And in some ways, I wished I had learned and paid attention more to cooking, but I think my mom viewed it more as, I mean, one of her full-time jobs, right? When you've got 8 kids in your
Hmm.
house, it really was a job for her, I think, but also a way that she was able to care for and love on her kids. So I would say I don't make a ton of my childhood recipes anymore. My mom and our family also had a lot of vegetables. And I'm married into a slightly different family with a lot of farm recipes and a little bit less vegetables unless it's corn or potatoes.
Hmm.
Um, so that's where we had talked about I, going through the seasons and the stages of life, right? Your influences on food are
Yeah.
different. So I went from with my mom and all of these, standard goulash type meals, potato salad, which is one me and my siblings will still make when we get together now as my mom's potato salad, to living with my grandma, who was cooking for one. She had had so many years of cooking for herself. And I'll never forget, she had said, I just never knew when I was younger that I would still have to come up with what to eat every night for the rest of my life. And she was like, one
Oh,
of her
true.
biggest life complaints was that, like, even as a single person, she still had to figure out what to cook.
Hmm. And
But
it's
when the two of us,
harder. It's
oh,
harder
yeah,
when it's just one or two people. Hmm.
you can't make a whole crock pot of a roast and
You
potatoes.
can, yes. And then you have to make sure that you're still home for a few days after that to
Yeah,
eat all of that, or some of it is okay to freeze and some of it really isn't that good to freeze. So
right.
this is more
We
planning.
So I have a lot of fun grandma recipes that were special to me. The
Mm.
one that always comes to mind is her chicken divan. I don't even
I
know how you
think
say
it's Devon, but what would
divan.
I know?
It's just like
I think.
cheesy broccoli chicken mixture that you serve over rice. But talking about like cooking for a small amount of people, my grandma would microwave her chicken breast, her boneless, skinless chicken breast in a glass pie pan to cook it.
Oh my gosh.
Which
Did you
like
ever taste it like that? Because the texture would
it
probably
was
really
only ever
change.
mixed in with stuff. Like we never ate it plain. It was
Okay.
it was one of those just like that's what she found worked for her to
Oh,
motivate her to still put a hot meal on the table,
sure.
even
Yeah,
if it was
which
a very small batched
uh,
food. Um, but yeah, that kind of feeds into one of the threads that I've taken in over the years that is now the most prominent part of my, I guess, cooking identity, how I manage my kitchen and my household really revolves around the lazy genius. Um, so, but before I met the lazy genius, I was introduced to, I don't know how I got this book, the I Hate to Cook book. I think my sister gave it to me, or I'd found it in some old pile from books in our home.
oh, so
But I
maybe it was actually in your house. Okay.
think it might have been in my house as a kid, and I ended up with it at some point. It's the I Hate to Cook book by Peg Bracken. and I think it was published in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. And I have to correct you. I don't cook out of this book. This is not yeah, it was 1960. This is not a cooking.
Oh, sorry. We're both looking at it right now. People can't see that, but we're both looking because I checked a book out, a newer version, the 50th. It's the 50th anniversary edition. And
Mhm.
you're looking at your old version. Yeah, I misunderstood. I thought that you actually cook from this book. Okay.
No, but to be introduced to the fact that, okay, maybe I don't inherently love cooking and slaving away in the kitchen. And I find I have other things I want to do with my time. And I
Hmm.
don't think I can even blame it on like, oh, I'm busy and I have kids. I think I felt like this before I had kids, and I would feel like this once they're out of the house. Cooking is not something that I inherently get a lot of joy from, but it is a part that you still like have to do. You still have to decide what to eat every night for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And so reading this book, it is a cookbook, but the author writes through it in a very narrative style. And it was back in the 60s where there was a very large stigma about like housewives and cooking, and that was just a part of your identity and culture.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she was like, I don't like it. I
I
don't like
didn't think about that. Like the time
the
period, the
culture of it.
eras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she
And
wrote this whole book with this narrative of like, hey, maybe you also hate to cook. Here's how we can work around that. It's hysterical. So even if you don't want a cookbook, just checking it out to reading some of the clips is,
hmm
I think it was very freeing. I felt a lot of solidarity um, in my mindset, and it gave me a lot of permission to maybe I don't have to love to cook, and that's okay, and we can find some
hmm
workarounds.
Right. I mean, cooking is for some people a language of love, and other
Mhm.
things for other people are their language of love for their family. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
You know?
I I need to read the blurb. So she has a whole chapter about when you have company coming over.
Hmm.
And she starts the chapter talking about how you should never accept an invitation to dinner. The reason is plain: sooner or later, unless you have luckily disgraced yourself at their home, or unless they get transferred to Weehawken, you will have to return the invitation and invite them over for dinner. So she gives you these like 8 different menus of kind of brainless, easy to pull off with all these hacks but they look impressive. And
Hmm.
when she says, actually, 8 company menus are quite enough. If you find you are serving the same thing too often to the same people, then invite someone else instead. It is much easier to change your friends than your recipes. So her wit throughout the entire book brings a lot of levity, I think, as I
Right.
approach working in the kitchen. I, but the other large influence then, I mean, when I got married, I did not have any recipes in my pocket, right?
Hmm.
Turns out, I mean, I knew how to make eggs about 6 different ways. I knew how to make a bowl of oatmeal, and I could boil noodles for pasta. But beyond that, I didn't have much. But the year that I got married, my husband had 2 other siblings who got married at about the same time. And he grew up, with so many family recipes. And his mom, there's so much nostalgia in their family and recipes that have been passed down from grandmas. And that year, his sister took it upon herself to collect all of mom's recipes, type them all up into recipe cards, and create an actual recipe book binder with all of these recipes. And she made 5 copies, one for each of the 4 kids, and then a copy for mom and dad. So I
Hmm.
was essentially handed this here's the family recipes you can cook when I got married. But it's been a huge lifeline. Uh,
Yeah.
Jumping in and not knowing anything in the
Mhm.
kitchen, I guess, to start.
My guess is that the recipes are probably fairly easy because his mother-in-law or his mom, so your mother-in-law,
Mhm.
if they're farmers, I mean, they would have to be sort of those Hardee's meat and potatoes, but pretty quick to get on the table or bring out to the field to the guys working out there. They probably aren't really difficult.
No, definitely not difficult. A lot of casseroles, and you will find an abundance of Velveeta, cream of soup, ground beef, right? Canned vegetables, and salads, the Midwestern salads with all of the Jello and the canned fruit and Cool Whip.
It
Um,
has to come with air quotes. The salads.
we don't need air quotes for any of that. It's a salad. That's what a salad
Yeah.
is. um, very much, right? And so that was new to me. But we also found that when his sister accumulated the recipes, she didn't quite like run them all by mom. So there were a few recipes that we went to go cook them, and mom would say, "Oh, like I don't cook the tapioca pudding on the stovetop anymore. I just microwave that." Like some of
Oh.
the instructions are a little bit outdated. There's one
Mm-hmm.
that still has oleo listed, and she's like, "No, I just use butter uh,
Mm-hmm.
for that recipe." And then the story that always gets told is there's one recipe for Farmer's Delight, which is kind of like a stroganoff. It's like beef, ground beef, egg noodles, and Velveeta, cream corn, and cream of mushroom soup. But one of the ingredients says half a can of milk. That's just it, half a can of milk. And in, I think it was like middle school or high school, Michael went to go make this recipe when he was home at one point, and he's like, I don't know what kind of milk. So he pulled out a can of sweetened condensed milk and put
Oh.
in half a can of sweetened condensed milk. This came to light with his mom, and he's like, "What?" And she goes, "I just take the can. I don't know if it's of the sweet, the sweet corn or the cream of soup." She's like, "I just
Soup.
fill the can halfway up with milk and pour it
Mm-hmm.
in." Oh, so the recipes are very Midwestern, even in how they're written, right? And there's not
Right.
a lot of formality to all of it.
Well, and that reminds me too that your mother-in-law, so back when I did an episode of funeral potatoes and
Yes.
Wilmingtons, what are funeral potatoes or cheesy hash browns, you submitted her recipe for what she calls cheesy hash brown, or let's see,
Yeah, I think it's
cheesy, what
cheesy
is
hash brown potatoes.
hash brown baked potatoes is what she calls them, and they have Velveeta.
Yes.
And when you sent it to me, I remember you're like, I use pre-shredded Velveeta because nobody has time to sit and shred Velveeta, which is exactly why they make pre-shredded
Yeah.
Velveeta
Have you
because
ever
there are
tried
people,
shredding Velveeta?
I have, and it's very difficult because it's
It's
so soft. Yeah, it's
And
hard.
then if you catch yourself, you're like, "Oh no, I'm at the bottom of this box of Velveeta, and now I have to pull a box out from the shelf, and it's even softer." You might as
Yeah.
well just.
What I learned from Christiane in one of the episodes, she told me that you can buy a box of Velveeta that hasn't broken into like maybe the pound has 5 different little segments
Yeah.
wrapped in there, which that was new to me, so that's kind of helpful. But all right, well, the goulash recipes of your mom, so you shared a few of those with me. Some have, like you said, noodles, some have rice, some have beans, and so we'll share a few of those on the blog so people can have from some variations of goulash if they want to give them a try. But I want to talk about this potato salad because it's so funny how a potato salad, think of how many hundreds and thousands of ways there are and recipes for potato salad.
Yeah.
We sort of get used to our families, and that's what we like best. So I
Hmm.
want to know what's in your mom's potato salad that makes it so good that you and your siblings still make it.
You know, I've thought about this a lot because as much as my mom's potato salad is and forever always will be the gold standard, I do love a lot of variations of potato salad. In my mind, they're
Okay.
just different. You don't
Hmm.
compare them, they're just different.
Kind of like chocolate chip cookies, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You can like more than one. Um, in my years, though, I've noticed I think almost every other potato salad I come across is more sweet, and my mom's is more vinegary.
Mm.
So I think that's one of the big distinguishers is I'll eat somebody else's potato salad and I'll be like, it's okay. But I think why I don't think it's the same or why I don't love it is it's more of a sweet base. So I
Yeah.
don't know if people are using Miracle Whip more than mayonnaise, or if they're adding sugar, or if they just don't have. So my mom's we usually use like apple cider vinegar
Hmm.
and oil. And then there is no sugar, and we use mayonnaise, so there's no Miracle Whip. Um, and even the recipe card that I shared with you, like all of these recipes, you're like, it's evolved a little over the years because we don't use yogurt. That's the one big difference in that card I sent you was it's just mayonnaise. There's no yogurt mixed into it. But I think a lot of it is the making sure you get it vinegary enough, I think is the big trick. Because now
Hmm.
even when my mom used to make it, she had to make a double batch and it was this huge bowl, and she'd probably make it every other week or so in the summer.
Mm.
She refused to cook with heat if she could avoid it in the summer. And especially on Sundays, she didn't believe really in cooking on Sundays. So in the summer on Saturday, she would whip up a cold salad. And it was either potato salad, cold like ham and cheese noodle salad. We had a tuna salad, cold salad, and
Hmm.
then a crab one. That was the only one I didn't like, was like the imitation crab salad.
Yeah.
But the potato salad was everyone's favorite, and it's the one we all reach for. But I had to adapt the recipe even to make it a small batch because no one else in my family will eat it. And
Oh,
sometimes you get
sure.
a hankering. So now I cook it in the Instant Pot and I like go way overboard on the hard boiled eggs. But I think the real kicker there is making sure there's enough like salt, pepper, vinegar taste, and maybe a little bit of that mustard. But like I don't even put celery in it anymore. But it is one that when I host like the whole family or if we're doing a big get together, somebody has to make it. And my mom has kind of bowed out. She has said that was a labor of love and she did it for enough
Oh.
years that the rest of us can do the work to make her potato salad. But it is one of the few things that all of us 8 siblings still very much agree upon is that
Mhm.
it is the best and we all miss it all year long.
So when one of you makes it for a family gathering, do you pretty much follow the recipe then, or are you making it the way you like it?
I would say I mostly follow the recipe.
Mm.
And then, but a lot of it is like you have to taste it as you go and make sure it's got the right taste to it.
Hmm.
And I think the recipe card does not have nearly enough eggs in it. So usually if you're making it, whoever's with you is like, put more in, put more in, put more in. And then I have one brother who is a vegan. So then we pull his portion out and we do a vegan based mayonnaise and we leave the eggs out. And then he can
Oh,
some potato salad too.
sure. Yeah. And your grandma's chicken divan, you shared that recipe too, right? Do you make that one a lot? Do your kids like it with the broccoli? Do they like cook broccoli?
I don't, okay. So I married someone who doesn't love vegetables, like I said. Broccoli is probably like the most evil of all vegetables. Uh,
Oh.
and so I do the bag of steamed frozen broccoli that I cook on the side if we're doing like my chicken Alfredo or something else. And I've got one kid who will eat that with me. Uh, but I have not attempted it with my kids yet because I think all 3 boys in the family, my husband and my 2 boys would be like, nope, because it's all mixed in. You can't
Yeah.
separate it out. Uh, so I do miss that one. I had it one time, one of my sisters made it when I was visiting, and it was like,
Hmm.
oh, grandma's chicken demand. I missed it so much. And we're not a big rice family,
Oh, yeah.
me and my family now. Whereas I think growing up and with my grandma, we did a lot more rice. So it's
Yeah.
kind of fallen through the cracks, but that is still holds a very special place in my heart.
Hmm. Do they like green beans?
We do some green beans, and especially, if you can make them cheesy with some cream of mushroom soup and Velveeta
Of
mixed in there.
course.
Cheesy green beans. Yep.
Well, I was just gonna say I have this casserole that's supposed to have broccoli, but I will make it with green beans instead. And so I
Maybe
was
that's
just wondering.
fine. I
Yeah.
might be able to get away with that.
But
Yeah.
if they don't get cheesy enough, then probably not.
Yeah. We'll
So
see.
speaking of cheese, let's go to chicken Alfredo. You have a great recipe for chicken Alfredo that you do.
So this is always my asterisks of almost everything I cook now is for the most part inherited from my
Mm.
husband's side of the family. That's our standard recipe deck, except for chicken Alfredo. This one is mine. I get the credit for it. And there's no competition. His mom didn't really make Alfredo growing up. Once in a blue moon, she got the can Prego sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried this one out years ago and I found a recipe. I did a lot of variations off of Pinterest and I kind of hodgepodged a few of them together. And it is one of my husband's favorite recipes. So I get like, yay, it's not just his mom's recipe, it's my own chicken
Right.
Alfredo. And I love adaptability. So I definitely adapt the recipe depending on if I'm a little low on a certain ingredient,
Mm.
or whether or not I can pair it with bacon or chicken, or we just had it last night before, we had it a couple nights ago with shrimp.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I will tell you, always my biggest caveat is it it is extremely calorie dense. This is a rich recipe of chicken Alfredo. So it is not something you can put on your weekly meal docket. It's more of a special treat, very indulgent. But with that, it's also really bad for leftovers. So it's not made like with a roux. and it's not
Mm-hmm.
made very stable. It's basically thick because it's butter, cream cheese, Parmesan cheese, heavy cream. There's no, I don't know, proper cooking technique to kind of stabilize the sauce. So the second it goes into leftover land, I mean, that thing separates so badly.
Okay.
But it is to die for the first night. Um, and I will, like, when you start it, it calls for butter, but sometimes if I've got some fresh, like, bacon grease, I'll put a little bit of bacon grease in there in place
Mm-hmm.
of some of the butter, get some of that, like, bacon flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I've tweaked it a little bit depending on what the night needs and what we've got, but I've learned to make it a small enough batch that we don't typically have a lot of leftovers. But that is one of
Yeah.
my, like, claim to fames. It's my showstopper, one of my company meals that I can pull out. And then I can cook my frozen bag of steamed broccoli on the side for myself and my daughter.
I love Alfredo and broccoli sauce or broccoli, Alfredo sauce and broccoli.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
so good.
What kind of cheeses are in there? You said cream cheese, Parmesan.
So it starts with just butter and garlic, Italian seasoning, salt and pepper. And then you put in the cream cheese, and then you add the heavy cream, and then shredded Parmesan cheese.
Okay.
And that's about it. Yeah, that's all of the
Mm-hmm.
ingredients. Um, and it took a lot of time to find one that I felt like tasted. I mean, but it's so rich and it's so indulgent and it's so delicious. But then it ruins Alfredo anywhere else you go. Because
Oh yeah.
my husband used
Homemade
to, like,
sauce will do
love
that though.
ordering Alfredo at restaurants, and every time he tries, he's like, "There's not enough sauce, and it doesn't taste nearly as good as your Alfredo." Like, I've kind of ruined it for
Yeah.
him.
That's
Um,
good though.
but
But
it's
it's true. I love Alfredo. But there's not enough flavor in
mhm.
the sauce. The only place that I still remember that had amazing sauce, if you've been in Brookings for 12 years, you maybe don't remember the Ram Pub when it was a
Yeah, we never made it
restaurant.
out there. Yeah.
When it was a restaurant, it was on Main Street. It's the Bank bar
Hmm.
now, which is really cool. They redid and it's really awesome in there. But they don't serve, they're not
Right.
cooking in the kitchen. Anyway, when Tom Wyseth owned that as the Ram Pub, they made a Cajun chicken Alfredo. And by
Mm.
Cajun, it didn't mean it had like those vegetables and things in there. It meant that the sauce was this orangey, a little bit spicy,
Yeah.
smoky. That was the most amazing Alfredo sauce. If I can ever ask Tom for that recipe for
Yep.
the Cajun Alfredo sauce.
I'm a big fan of shortcuts, right? So I've got the jar of already minced garlic that we
Mm-hmm.
abundance, and I do a lot of the dried, right? The container of dried
Mm-hmm.
Italian seasoning. And if I'm out of that, I'll throw some, like, oregano or basil or different things. And you do the whole, like, crush it between your hands to get a little bit
Oh,
of the flavor broken in there.
mm-hmm.
But it's a lot of, again, that taste as you go. And I think it's the big trick of getting the saltiness on point. So that can really be affected if I'm using bacon
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
gonna mix bacon in, or if I'm using any bacon fat, or if I cooked it in the pan that I just cooked bacon in, I might have to
Mm-hmm.
adjust the saltiness factor. And only once or twice I've over salted it, and then you can't walk back from that, which is
Yeah.
which is tough. But you gotta have enough salt. I'm
Yeah.
not a great cook, but that's the one thing that I'm like, oh, when in doubt, I guess a little more salt.
So speaking of salty, then you have to wash that down. You have a recipe. This is something different that not a lot of people have heard of, but in the Midwest, we love our rhubarb. And you have a story about rhubarb juice.
Yeah, I was so shocked you had never heard of this. Just knowing that you've talked to so many people about rhubarb stuff and you're
Yeah.
so in that Midwestern scene.
I remember
Uh,
Jen Buse telling me about rhubarb slushes,
yeah.
and there's alcohol, I think, involved in that. So that's really cool. But just a straight up like a juice that you could serve at a picnic, that I'm not sure. Mm-mm.
So my husband's family, they're very big into the rhubarb, and there is an abundance of rhubarb desserts. His mom's rhubarb pie is at the top of the list.
Mm.
I tried making it one time, and I've just decided we'll just let mom keep making the pie on that. But there's all sorts of crumbles and just different. There's a whole stack of recipes in this book that are just rhubarb focused. But the one that's probably the most unique is this rhubarb juice. So you cook, it's like takes 12 cups of cut up rhubarb. So it's an
That's a
investment,
lot.
a
Hmm.
lot. Uh, and you cook it down, and there is an abundance of sugar. You have to mix in a packet of Kool-Aid mix. So usually we go for like the dark cherry or cherry Kool-Aid mix. And
Okay.
then there's a box of Jello, like cherry Jello mix. So it
Okay.
is a rich, sweet, and it ends up being more of like a syrup almost. So it's not a standalone drink. And you filter, you strain out the rhubarb once it's
Oh,
done.
sure.
So there's no rhubarb chunks in it, but you cook it till it is like mush, and it's got all the
Mm-hmm.
sugar and all the added powders in there. And then you cut it with pop. So depending on how strong your batch turned out, you might do anything from, a fifth or a fourth of your glass is rhubarb juice and the rest is pop, up to like a half and half. Um, and I would say I don't want a whole cup of it, but if we have a jug in our fridge and Michael's making himself a cup, he knows to bring me a little tiny,
Oh,
tiny amount, and the kids are obsessed with it. But it's treated like gold. So if mom has made a batch, at his parents' house, or Michael's made a batch, it's like a very protected item. That's like we almost don't want to pull it out if the kids are around, because they'll just, little kids, they just like whiz
yeah.
their stuff and they leave their glasses half full on the
Half
counter. And
full.
you're like, oh no, that precious rhubarb juice. But they
Mm-hmm.
mix it with things. Probably the most common is mellow yellow, but I've also seen them mix it with like Mountain Dew or Sprite, for the
Mm-hmm.
kids. But it's a huge family favorite hit. But you have to have 12 cups of rhubarb, and it's kind of a labor of love to make it and strain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I suppose it's treated like gold because rhubarb is only available for a few months out of the year. So it's not something you can make all the time. Although you can cut up rhubarb, you can
We do
freeze
a lot
it.
of frozen. We have a lot of frozen rhubarb throughout
Yeah.
the year.
Can you freeze? So it's almost like you're condensing it down to a simple syrup in a way, is what I'm feeling like it
Yeah, I'd say
sounds sort of like.
it's more thin than it's not as thick as a traditional simple syrup. But you
Okay.
probably could even just keep cooking it down and do less water. But that's how they make it. Is I wouldn't say it's quite the density of a simple syrup, but it's definitely thicker than normal juice.
I was wondering if you can freeze it. That's why.
We haven't tried. I
Because
don't
you
know.
drink it
I
too
don't know how that works.
fast.
Because it always goes to, yep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd say, in our house, Michael probably I say we. Michael does anything involved with rhubarb. That's kind of his territory. So he makes a couple batches a year. Um,
Okay. And the
for
rhubarb's coming from your in-laws, or do you guys have some in your
We
yard
have
and
our
they're
own
working?
rhubarb plant now. So
Yay.
I am just as good at gardening as I am cooking, which is not. So I had high hopes when we first moved to our place 9 years ago, and we have a raspberry patch that is really my husband's
Ooh.
territory, and just enough that the kids pick raspberries off the bush, a couple times in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's got, I don't even know. I never walked back there. I think it's 3 rhubarb plants. So we have
Okay.
finally enough of a rhubarb crop that we don't have to steal from mom and dad anymore, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. Could you add lemonade so that it would be like a rhubarb lemonade?
Possibly. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of things you could do with the
It
rhubarb juice.
sounds really
If it's
good.
rhubarb
So,
juice. I think Michael likes the way it is now, and I don't drink it enough that
mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, we don't need to change it. But our raspberries, he did experiment and make a raspberry simple syrup, because we had our largest crop yet this year. Those
Okay.
plants are 8 years old now, so they're finally getting somewhere. And he
Mm-hmm.
did make like a raspberry lemonade, homemade, like with lemonade from scratch.
Sure.
That turned out really good.
I bet.
I'll have to repeat that next year and actually lock in a recipe and write it down.
Did you have, before we move on, I want to talk about some books and reading, but did you have another cookbook? What was the
The lazy.
genius? What was that other cookbook that you had there that you popped up?
Yes. So this deserves its own platform. Not just this book, The Lazy Genius Kitchen by Kendra Adachi.
Okay.
But this is part of a larger world of The Lazy Genius. So it's a podcast. Kendra Adachi is the lazy genius. That's her title.
Oh,
I've
okay.
been following her podcast for many years now. And her big slogan is that you can be, I always get this backwards, you can be genius about the things that matter to you and lazy about the things that don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about doing everything perfectly all the time at 100%. It's about more compassionate time management, empathy, finding ways of doing things that work for you. So most of her audience and her books are geared a little bit more towards maybe the mom stage and running a household and doing all the things. But this was her second book. Her first book was about just her lazy genius principles, the 13 of them. But this one is kitchen focused. So she kind of rearranged some of her principles into the 5 steps and teaches you. It's not a cookbook. There's like 5 recipes in it.
Oh,
But she
oh, okay.
teaches you how to approach and improve, right? The way you want it, all the elements of your kitchen, everything from the space and the layout to meal planning, to grocery shopping, to the actual preparation or cleaning up. So there's all these different elements that go into running a kitchen. And the 5 steps are like, you have to essentialize and name what matters is one of her big rocks that she talks about. And I have always been a huge fan of that methodology. And I would say her teachings and her podcast and her books and all of it has been the most informative in my life, especially running a household, working part-time, doing the parent thing, having to put meals on the table, cleaning. I don't like to clean as much as I don't like to cook, right? I'd rather be
I,
downtown reading a book, talking with friends and
oh
drinking
my
coffee.
gosh, I'm with you.
And so her approach and her methodologies and frameworks and she doesn't tell you what to do. She teaches you how to figure out for yourself what works for you. And so yeah, there's only like 5 recipes, but in this book, she also has a soup rubric. So like how to make any soup. It's kind of like
Oh,
a graph of like, do you want it this type or that type?
right.
Yes or no, go this way or that way.
Oh,
And
that's
she
cool.
has a seasoning graph of like, these are seasonings that work together, that pair well together, right? Like tomato and basil. Um, and how to cook a chicken, any cut of chicken with any approach to cooking, like here's how that works. So it's more of less of a cookbook and more of a guide to running your
That
kitchen.
is a really cool concept that I've not heard of. That would be, I'm just thinking about how many people that would be a good, like a wedding gift, or even just somebody new, sort of maybe out of college, not in a dorm anymore, moving into a new place by
Yes,
themselves, or
yes.
setting up a new home.
Her first page says, "This is not a cookbook. This is a lifeline."
That looks
So
really neat.
I would say I don't use it on a daily basis, but when you're getting stuck in parts of
Hmm.
your kitchen, right? And
Hmm.
one of the biggest principles I would say comprehensively that I've taken in every part of my life, but probably most prominently in my meal planning and kitchen routine, is the concept of really recognizing and living in my seasons. So she does a lot of talk about your seasons, and that doesn't just mean, fall, winter, spring, summer.
Right.
And the permission to think about what season am I in? And that can mean the weather. It can mean like, honestly, 4 seasons a year doesn't make sense when you have kids in school because it's really more
Hmm.
like 3 chunks of time, fall, first semester, second semester, summer. So what season are you in? How do you find what works for this season and do what works in this season until it no longer serves you? And so when I think about meal planning, as much as I don't love to cook, I've really embraced a lot of meal planning, but people are always like, well, what's your secret? What do you do for meal planning? I'm like, depends. I change it up multiple times a year because
Hmm.
my season of work, my season of kids or sickness or weather or my mental health, all of that is going to impact like, what do I need? And when I start to feel that, hey, this way I've been meal planning isn't serving me anymore, it doesn't feel like a failure anymore. It starts to feel like, oh, that approach isn't serving me anymore. I think some parts of my seasons have shifted. What can I change? How can I mold this approach a little differently for this new season? And there's just so much more empathy and compassion and breathing room to do what works for you without the shame and the shoulds. And if you know anything about me and my teachings and my work and the things I'm passionate about, being told you just need to do fill in the blank is always going to get me on my soapbox because we are so much more complicated than that as humans
Yeah.
and households. And well, this is just the magic answer and the magic combination. And it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way.
No,
So
No.
I embrace that approach, the lazy
That
Susan.
reminds me, we didn't really talk much about what I wanted to ask you kind of in the beginning. You mentioned your work, how you got where you are today, not being a practicing CPA, but you do some things in the community and have gone through leadership groups and something.
Mhm.
Just I want you to just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, if you know me, you know I will try anything and everything. I have very little commitment bone in my body. I would rather just try all the things. I have serious FOMO, but it means then, I mean, over the 11, 12 years I've been in Brookings, I have joined a lot of different groups. I've been a part of a lot of programs. I've gotten involved in different boards and things in the community. So probably the most prominent have been things related to like the small business entrepreneurial community, done a lot of work like with the Brookings Chamber. I was a part of the COVID class of Leadership Brookings. We started in fall of 2020, and it was the smallest Leadership Brookings class, which actually is fun story where I first got introduced to you. I think I had
Oh.
seen your name before because I worked at DAC at one point in time, like everyone in Brookings. But you provided some baked goods for our class.
Hmm.
And I looked you up and I think I started following you on Instagram. And I think that was the start of that was back in 2020.
Wow, I remember that because I made, I think, the muffins
Yeah.
for in the morning.
Mhm.
And if I remember right, you shared a photo on Instagram or your Instagram story,
Yes.
and that's when I started following you too.
Oh, that's so fun.
Cool. Yeah,
It feels like more than 4 years ago. I'm gonna
I
be honest.
know. I'm
It's
like, it
actually
was only
blowing my mind.
then.
And since then, I actually went on last year, and I was able to be the facilitator for last year's Leadership Brookings class.
Okay.
Been on a few different chamber committees. I'm trying to get a entrepreneurial community kind of culture back. So I'm
Oh.
running like the Brookings area entrepreneur Facebook group, and we're just doing like some lunch and coffee meetups. So I'm very passionate about that. I'm also very involved in like the reading community. So huge advocate for my local library, which shout out, they're having, well, this isn't airing today, but we have our twice a year book sale that I like spread the word like crazy about because it is so much fun. And I'm bummed. This is the first time in a long time I'm not going to be able to go on opening night. It is an experience. And it's just a cultural thing to like show up half an hour early in line with everyone that's so excited to go shoulder to shoulder, like squished in this upstairs room to buy books. And then I've gotten really involved in our local, we have a new indie bookstore, The Nook downtown.
Hmm.
I'm a part of that book club there. So, and just very prevalent at like all the coffee shops in town, but it changes, right? With the seasons. But my involvement in community stuff has looked really different depending on the ages of my kids and what I'm doing for work and just what things kind of come across my world. Our new seasonal involvement thing, which is our fun nerdy thing, is my kids are now all into Pokemon. They don't know how to like battle, but they're very into collecting and trading Pokemon cards. And there's this new store called the Rabbit's Den in downtown Brookings. And the owners are the sweetest. Alan owns the store. His wife actually works at the Children's Museum. And
Oh.
so she's there a lot. And it has been the most like family friendly, fun place. They do a lot of like Magic the Gathering card game playing, a lot of other nerdy card games that I'm not even familiar with. They have a back room. They're running like a lot of Dungeons and Dragons groups. But I get to take my kids in there and they get to look through binders of used Pokemon cards. And I recently went and bought my daughter a Pokemon deck for her 6th birthday, which was last week. And I got to go to Rabbit's Den and I said, okay, I'm ready to buy Claire's binder or Claire's deck of Pokemon cards. And they're like, oh, and we have a promo. If you buy Pokemon, you get this tin. And then they threw in Lauren was there. She's like, what else can we just throw in for Claire? And she threw in a whole pack of stickers and this little key. And they just went so above and beyond. It was the most magical.
Oh.
Like, you guys need to shop small. Like, this is why just
Yeah.
there's a community element there.
That store, sorry to interrupt you, but it's Kitty Corner from the Children's Museum, right?
Yes. But I'm just such a fan of being a cheerleader of and supporting whatever is going on in the community. And I wish I could be a part of everything at all the time and that there were no limits. And then in my business too, right? I get to have some fun opportunities even outside of Brookings. helped put on an entrepreneurial conference. It was the first one, and they're going to make it an annual thing down in Omaha. So I just did a whirlwind trip down there. Got to
Yeah.
help run around and volunteer for that. But I am one of those floater people that wants to do everything all the time, which is really fun then, because if I have somebody that I know is new to town, it is very common that I'll be the one that they text, hey, what do you know about where I can go to the dentist or the eye doctor? And I get to say, hey, here's the flyby of what I know about all 6 of these places, right? And you can choose what might work for you. And here's some of the feedback we hear from everyone, or here's some of the differences between the different gyms in town. And but I love that we have a diverse room, like even coffee shops. We have a lot of coffee shops in Brookings, but they all are so unique. And I
Mm-hmm.
go to all of them because you have to, because sometimes I need something different. And so I just love the diversity of businesses and community, and just people anywhere that you get to have people gather. But I did tell you, I wanted to throw in, I love that individual people are so unique and different, and you never know, right? When you get to know someone, you can kind of put them in a box and be like, oh, they like reading and books and they've got young kids, right? If people looked at me, but you also don't know what other weird, quirky things they're into, which is why, like, I love getting
Yeah.
into. And then my weird, quirky thing this summer, I started watching D&D on YouTube. I have never played Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm fully sucked in to this, watching this group play. And it's actually, they've been going for like 10, 15 years. So I'm watching from like 8 years past one of their old campaigns. But just and it even opens up community. I'm getting to talk to random people at the Rabbit's Den about Dungeons and Dragons that I'm like, but you actually, if somebody, you think, oh, we don't have those things in common, or I don't like those hobbies or those things. But when you actually
Mm-hmm.
get to know people, you always have more in common than you think. And that's okay that maybe you're somebody that goes to the gym at 5:30 every morning, and that's something that is not part of my life right now. Or maybe you're somebody that loves keeping your house tidy and decorating for the holidays and cooking 5-course meals, and that's not something I do. But you can't let that be a barrier, right, to getting to know some people, because we have way too much in common, like at the core sense of who we are as humans, to let some of those little surfacey things stop you from like getting to know someone. And you don't know what kind of friendships you can strike up in those things. And there's my little
Yeah.
about.
Books. Do you have what kind of books do you read?
Probably my most go-to, I'm doing a lot more fiction in this stage of life. I'm kind of burnt out on, any self-help or business books for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
My most go-to genre is going to be like mystery, uh, kind of twisty, turny, but not creepy. I want
Me
like,
too.
I want suspense, but not like, ugh. It needs to feel okay, like
Mm-hmm.
fun, twisty, turny. So one of my all-time favorite new authors is Stuart Turton, I think is how you say his last name. It's The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I know kind of made the rounds in book club world, so it might be familiar to some. And then his second book, The Dark Waters, I didn't love so much, but his most recent one that came out this year was The Last Murder at the End of the World, and it was so good, right up there with the Evelyn Hardcastle book. But it's just wild. I want a book that it's going to resolve at the end to some degree. Like I know we're reaching an end point, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not just going to kill off the main character in the last chapter and like give you some weird, annoying ending. But I also want it to be the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. Every page, I was like, what is going on? What? I'm like flipping the pages, and like, it was amazing. It was just such a wild ride. So I do a lot of mystery. I will always take recommendations. I'm probably looking more for quirky recommendations, because I've been around a lot of the ones that are really talked about a lot
Familiar.
in
Mm-hmm.
mainstream, book talk. I don't really have TikTok, but in that world. So if anyone's got any kind of ones that are not super popular, that would be fun. Outside of that, I like a good biography. I like learning stuff. So do you remember the Theranos case? That was
Mm-mm.
the lady who like she was like the next Steve Jobs, and she defrauded investors around this like blood testing diabetes technology.
Okay.
it was in the news a lot. She's like still not in jail as far as I know, but I got to read the book that the Wall Street investigative journalist who broke the case. Um, so more like true crime, but again,
Oh,
not creepy.
yeah.
Uh, and then probably my other big categories, I do read a decent amount of like faith adjacent books.
Hmm.
Faith is a big part of my life. So like John Mark Comer, I've read a lot of his books recently in the last couple of years, which have been really influential for me personally.
So that genre, twisty turny.
Twisty turny, but not creepy.
When we're on Goodreads, I'm going to be looking for the genre, twisty turny.
I think the
Too
distinguisher is
bad.
if you can put the word fun also with that book, because you are not going to put the word fun on a book that's like creepy. So like
Dark.
Lucy Foley, Lisa Jewell, they've got a little amount of like, creepy vibe.
Oh, okay.
I don't think you would use the word fun to describe their books. But like the 7.5 Deaths, there wasn't definitely an element of fun to that one.
Okay.
I feel
Good.
like after reading that book, it's been almost 2 years maybe. I feel like I've just been chasing that experience again, and it's been hard to
Oh.
find. It's been hard to hit that level.
So it's kind of how your Alfredo sauce has ruined it for
A little
all
bit.
others, right? Like that book maybe has defined that level for you.
Oh, the other big one, if you're into mystery, if people like mystery, is the cozy mystery
Hmm.
genre. It's so cut and paste, predictable,
Yeah, kind of like Hallmark-ish, but
very Hallmarkish. But those are easier to find. You can identify what a cozy mystery book is really quickly. So
Mhm.
those are like a good palate cleanser. I like those sporadically through the year. The podcast I listen to for books is What Should I Read Next? And they always use the phrase a thimble full of weird. I like at least a thimble full of weird. And somebody else just said, well, maybe not a thimbleful. I like a Pyrex measuring cup full of weird in
Oh
my.
wow.
I was like, I think I'm somewhere in between there.
Yeah, that's a big difference. So well, Amanda, before I let you go, I want to ask just a couple more things, if you have recommendations, because again, we like to go places or experience things that other people have told us are pretty cool. So, do you have any sort of hidden gems that you know about in the Midwest that really only the locals would know about? Kind of like Cook's Kitchen and Brookings, you know?
I have two that come to mind. One is a rough recommendation because I haven't been there, but it's really high on my list. Have you heard there's a place in it's like that weird gap of southwestern Minnesota where there's not a lot going on between like Marshall, Mankato type area. There's this little coffee shop place that does a Harry Potter flight.
Have
You know
not
what
heard of
it
that.
is?
Do you know what the place is called?
I'm gonna pull it up, but I'm also gonna make sure to send you the link. But it's on like,
Okay.
you know how you can save spots on your maps or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but there's this little, and it's like they also have like breakfast food and some danishes and different stuff. But they've got like a Harry Potter theme, so that's really high on my list to check out as like a weird place. I'll follow up with the name of that.
Okay.
Um, but the one that comes to mind, I don't know if it's just locals know about it, but my husband and I, for one of our anniversaries, we went to this place outside of Chautauqua, Wisconsin, called Canoe Bay. So not like a
Hmm.
coffee shop, but like a place, a little retreat place.
Oh.
And I could not believe you don't think about like driving out near Chautauqua, Wisconsin as like some special place, but the scenery over there, you get all the trees and you get these hills and these like windy roads. And it felt like we were just out in the middle of nowhere. And it's this little tiny retreat place, and you rent this cabin, and it is like fancy, like, but you're out there with like no cell service. I don't even know if there was Wi-Fi. Like, you're not super connected. You're very disconnected. It all is around this little like tiny pond place. And a lot of what you're paying
Oh.
for is seclusion.
Sure.
But then they like bring you, you can put in like your breakfast order, and they bring you your breakfast and leave it outside your cabin door in this beautiful handcrafted like wood container.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and when we went the one time, I literally was sitting on the front deck in like the big fluffy road with my coffee, and this deer and her baby fawn just walked right past me, like 4 feet
Hmm.
away from me, just walked past. And there's like the ginormous snapping turtle in the pond where we did like, some kayaking, and
Hmm.
it was just this little hidden gem, and it's on my bucket list. I think we're going to try to go back for like our 15-year anniversary.
Okay. I don't even know where Chautauqua, Wisconsin is.
So it's basically you go to the Minneapolis Twin Cities area and it's just basically over the border into Wisconsin.
Seriously.
So it's
Okay.
only 5.5, a little more than 5.5 hours from Brookings. You just cut straight across Minnesota, kind of dip down.
Blogs, podcasts, you talked about a few
I talked
already.
about a few. The only other shout outs I would give is Mel's Kitchen Cafe. Have you heard of that one?
Well, I did last week from you.
Okay, yes. One of my celebrity claim to fames is that I started following her Facebook page when she had like 1,000 followers. And now it's what's over 500,000 at least on
Okay.
Facebook. Um, she was one of the first, like if I needed to learn how to cook something basic, or like when I was first looking for recipes outside of the book that I inherited, it would
Hmm.
be Mel's Kitchen Cafe. And I followed her journey for years. I heard of her because the family I babysat for in college, the mom had gone to college with her.
Oh, cool.
So, and then she grew, she only just now, this last year, released her very first cookbook, but I have
Okay.
a few standard recipes. Her baked oatmeal is one I have memorized that I cook in our family all the time. Um, I have a few select special ones. Her chocolate chip recipe, chocolate chip cookie, don't tell my mother-in-law who's probably listening to this, but my sister-in-law has said that Mel's chocolate chip cookie recipe is now the gold standard. Like
Uh-oh.
even my in-laws, but my
What's your
mother-in-law,
mother what's your mother-in-law's name?
Cynthia.
Cynthia. We love everything else.
Um, so Mel's is something that I'll even have somebody be like, "Have you heard of Mel's?" And I'm like, "I'm the one who recommended her to you. What are you talking about?" Like, so that's a very standard one. And then Bree McCoy. So she's friends with the Lazy Genius. So that's how I heard of her. But she just
Okay.
released The Cook's Book, which I got for Christmas last year. And there's a lot more teaching involved. So
Mm.
teaching about the understanding of your different knives and how to actually properly brown something on the skillet. And then she gives you the recipes to practice that technique that she's trying to
Oh.
do, like how to chop an onion type stuff.
Hmm.
So she's been kind of an inspiration. I would say the recipes in there are still a little step up in complexity
Oh.
for my day-to-day life, but when I want to try something special and new and I need a little extra hand holding in the recipe,
Yeah.
that's what I'm pulling out. And then shout out to the Lazy Genius has a Facebook group, the Lazy Genius Collective. So it's all things Lazy Genius. So people will post in there, help me, Lazy Genius, packing my kids' backpacks for school in the morning. Here's what
Oh.
matters, here's what doesn't, and people will give recommendations and ideas.
Hmm.
That's been a lifesaver community, I would say.
Hmm. What are your social media that you want to share?
I'm definitely in LinkedIn at just Amanda Runia. I do hang out with people on Facebook and Instagram. I'm probably more social and fun on Instagram and just share that over to my Facebook. So my Instagram is amanda.runia, Runia. And that's where I mean, that's where you and we started hanging out,
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
occasional back and forth interaction. So that's where I've made a lot more
Right.
of my community friends, which has been really
Yeah.
neat. Um,
Yep. And we only met in person, you and I, just a couple weeks ago for the first time. And I'm so thankful for you, Amanda, because you're like, all right, we just need to meet in person. Let's meet for coffee
let's
sometime
go.
when you're in town. And I just appreciate that because I know people sometimes think that I know a lot of people or have a lot of friends. I don't. So for somebody to say, let's go for a coffee, it was
Let's
just
just
really
do
cool.
it.
And I loved spending my morning with you. So
It was super fun. It
yeah.
is hard to make friends as an adult, I'm not gonna lie. Uh, I've learned you can just get really awkward about it. And that's that's the
Yeah.
way to go.
Yeah.
You just say the awkward thing and do the awkward thing. And then when you meet them for the fifth time and you still can't remember their name, you just be awkward about it and that's okay.
Yeah. All right. I have just two more questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go for your busy day. You're invited to a Christmas party where you can bring an appetizer or a sweet treat. What do you bring?
So I would say it's got to be a small group, but I would bring pot de creme. So this is a Mel's
Oh,
recipe, and it's spelled like pots de creme. So
mm-hmm.
it's basically a fancy way of saying a pot of chocolate cream. It's like
Yeah.
heavy cream chocolate. but it's super indulgent and fancy. And I made it one year for some family Christmas stuff. And the last couple of years, I've had one of the family members be like, you want to bring the ingredients to that and make that?
Mm.
And you can pour it out into really tiny dishes. So you just get a small taste of it. Otherwise, it's really rich. But I'll definitely share the recipe link to that one. That would be my special showstopper.
Cool. Okay. I would eat that, definitely. What inspiration do you want to leave us with, Amanda? What do you want to just wrap it up with?
I would say, like, when in doubt, choosing compassion and empathy for others and yourself has always been kind of the go-to in my brain. Interacting with other humans, interacting with family members, people that maybe you spent too much time with over holiday times. And strangers, right? But also for yourself. It's become kind of a huge life mantra of mine when I start feeling those tugs of frustration and how come people don't see things a certain way, or how come we can't agree on something, or just the messy interacting parts of being a human surrounded by other humans that are messy. Because I'm repeatedly going back to compassion and gratitude, or compassion and empathy. Like, at the end of the day, I'm grateful you're here. I'm grateful I get to spend time with you, and I can have compassion that I don't understand what you're going through, and you might not understand what I'm going through. And also just for myself, that those moments that I need to have compassion on myself and empathy and gratitude and kindness to myself. But
yeah, we need to talk to ourselves as nicely as we do to others, right? That's the hardest.
Easier said than done.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thanks for being here and sharing practical and some good, feel-good, emotional things too today.
Thank you, Staci. It has been such a pleasure, and I am so excited to just keep being friends.
Amanda, you are more than a Pyrex measuring cup full of Midwestern cozy. I really like how Amanda embraces the seasons of life that she's in to approach her meal planning and just overall routine in a way that really helps her recognize when something isn't serving her anymore, and then just getting rid of it without feeling like she's failing. We all could probably use a little bit of that. I don't know, which recipe will you try first? I'd like to say the alfredo sauce, but I'll have to wait with that until I'm making a meal for Kalani and Sajin. So I'm thinking maybe Grandma Joe's casserole, because it has hamburger and carrots and potatoes. And I think it sounds sort of like a hobo packet that we do in the oven, except it's a stovetop casserole, so that might be where I start. You can get the recipes and links from the episode on my website, randomsweets.com. And please come join the community on my Facebook page, Funeral Potatoes of Wool Mittens. I'm really grateful that you're listening, that you're tuning in, you're subscribing, maybe writing a review, and for sharing episodes on your social media and then recommending it to a friend so that we really can grow this community. I'm your host, Staci Mergenthal. Sweet wishes.